First, let's start with this case. I met my wife 7 years ago, and early in our relationship, I vaguely remember her mentioning that she wanted to name her son after her father. I thought it was a sweet gesture and a reflection of the high regard she had for him. At the time, I didn't know her father well enough to form my own opinion, but I assumed he must be a great man if she wanted to honor him in that way. Fast forward to the present day. She's pregnant with our first child. He's a boy. She wants to name him after her father. I'm now very familiar with the man and have since discovered he's not a good person. He's verbally abusive to his wife and a recently reformed alcoholic who, during his battle with addiction, made some deeply poor choices that affected his family. The only reason he quit drinking in the past 2 years is due to personal medical issues that literally prevents him from doing so. He also holds harmful views, frequently telling the parents of his existing male grandchildren not to raise weaklings or wimps. Paraphrasing, whenever he sees the boys doing something he deems feminine. And this is just scratching the surface. I told her I'm absolutely not okay with naming our child after her father. She's very upset, saying, "How could you?" and accusing me of flipping the script on her since I've known her intentions since the very start. To be fair, she mentioned it to me once early in our relationship, and I had mostly forgotten about it over the years. Secondly, I never actually agreed to it. I just said I thought it was a nice gesture at the time. I asked her why she would want to name our child after a man whose values we've both acknowledged are so different from ours, or after a grandparent she's intentionally kept at a distance, by her own admission, to protect her peace and mental health. She's only recently increased contact with him because of his health scare and her pregnancy. I'm genuinely astounded by her digging her heels in at this. Am I in the wrong for refusing to name our child after an idiot? Let's start judging. You're not in the wrong. Here's the deal. Naming a child is a very important partnership task. Tell your wife that you both have to be okay with the name, whatever it is, and then each of you have infinite vetoes, that you're vetoing her father as a name, 100%. But then she's welcome to say no to anything you come up with until you find one that's mutually workable. That's fair. That's reasonable. And I agree with you that your wife seems a bit off course in her sailing through reality if she thinks naming a child after her father is a good idea. You're not in the wrong. I don't usually care much about naming issues, but this is not a naming issue. It's a mental health issue, with your wife deliberately choosing to name her child after a man she knew as an abusive alcoholic and who she keeps at a distance because of his repugnant values. It feels like she's punishing both herself and her child, and you as well. She needs help. You're not in the wrong. Her father is not a good man. Why would she think you'd be okay with naming an innocent child after him? Next up, my 20F family is originally from Sweden. My sister Christine, 30F, was born in Sweden and was raised speaking Swedish and English. She and my parents came to the US when she was 10, and I was born not long afterwards. I was raised only speaking English. My parents did not bother having me learn Swedish because it isn't a widely spoken language where we live, and in fact, when I was little, they had a rule that Christine could only talk to me in English. They did this because they didn't want to hinder me from being able to communicate with my peers. I've visited Sweden maybe twice when I was really little and don't have any recollections. Christine, however, has a lot of fond memories from her childhood. Since she's moved out, she has regularly visited Sweden. She has been married to her husband, Eric, 30M, for about 3 years. Eric is also from Sweden and came to the US in his early 20s. Eric was also raised speaking Swedish and English, but is more comfortable talking in Swedish. They have a daughter, Elsa, who is 18 months old and learning to talk. When they came over for Christmas dinner, I tried to talk to Elsa, but Kristen told me that I can only talk to Elsa in Swedish, but not English. I thought she was raising Elsa speaking both Swedish and English, but she told me that they are not going to bother teaching her English. I asked why, and Kristen told me that they want Elsa to be connected to her heritage and also because they plan on eventually moving back to Sweden. I asked if she had an idea as to when they will move, and she said it could be 1 year or 10 years. I told Kristen that she is doing Elsa a big disservice by not teaching her English. She told me it won't be an issue as she'll learn it when she goes to kindergarten. I said that I can understand wanting Elsa to know Swedish, and if they had any immediate plans to move back to Sweden, then I could understand prioritizing Swedish over English. But since they don't have any immediate plans to move back there, she should learn both languages now so she can communicate with her English-speaking relatives in the U.S., as well as her peers and her teachers when she goes to school. I said that not teaching Elsa any English at all is insane. Kristen got mad at me and told me I am being xenophobic. I told her this would not be an issue if Elsa speaks English too, but because almost nobody around here speaks Swedish, she's hindering her daughter. She said that it's possible that by the time Elsa is ready to start school, they might have moved back to Sweden. My parents are mostly on my side but say that they understand why she's doing this. And I was being harsh by saying that she was insane for not teaching her English and should be more understanding. I feel it is equally harsh for her to say I'm xenophobic. I think it's great to be multilingual, but one needs to be able to communicate with the majority of the people where they live. But now I'm starting to feel like maybe I was too harsh. Let's start judging. You're not in the wrong. They live in the U.S., but they might move back to Sweden, so they're not teaching their daughter English. That's actually pretty dangerous. For example, what happens if Elsa gets lost and she can't understand when people ask her where her parents are, nor could she tell anyone who they are? Every little kid gets lost at some point in their lives, so this is not an unlikely scenario. In an emergency, how would, say, 3-year-old Elsa be able to tell anyone? I also have a good friend from Sweden, and she speaks 8 languages. According to her, English is a required subject in school in Sweden. So Elsa would actually be behind other kids who may have been speaking and/or understanding English their whole lives. Both your parents and Kristen are crazy. Teach your kids as many languages as you can, at the age when learning languages is free. The more you know, the better. Numerous studies have shown a minor delay in the early grades, and then a great boost in later years. You're in the wrong. And literally nobody in these comments knows jack about what they're talking about, or language acquisition. Your sister is doing exactly what experts recommend in order to teach a native language in a region it's not spoken. I promise it's not going to slow her kids down in the slightest. Learning English is inevitable in the U.S., and not only that, the kid is going to end up more fluent and comfortable in English regardless. You'd be surprised by how much your niece will already know by the time school starts, and by the time first grade begins, nobody will be able to tell she didn't learn English as a first language at home. Next up, I, 19F, am the youngest of my siblings. We had abusive, alcoholic parents and nobody that would help growing up. This is important because it turned us into who we are today and will help you better understand the issues in this post. I watched several of my siblings face really bad methamphetamine addiction. When I was 3, my second oldest nephew, David, was born and placed with me and my parents, his grandparents, for years. My sister, 33 TT, was finally sober and capable of taking care of him, so he moved back with her. He was 10. After a few years, my sister had a few more kids and now has 5 that live with her, 7 in total. No father figure, and they all have different fathers that aren't there very much, aside from the 2 that don't live with her. After seeming to be sober since getting David back, my sister started disappearing for days on end again. I wasn't old enough to recognize this behavior when she was previously using, but now I knew what she was doing. She would usually leave David to watch the rest of the kids while she went on benders. My parents were totally oblivious to what was happening. Either that, or they just didn't want to believe it was happening again. Well, me? Oh, I was pissed. For starters, you don't sign your 13-year-old up to watch all his younger siblings by himself and take care of the house, especially when there are 4, ranging from newborn to 8 years old. The next thing was the fact that she couldn't even bother texting anyone back to let us know she is even alive. I was livid at the fact that she just left them all alone. I would actually walk there, about 5 miles, to go help watch the kids and make them food. and then eventually got my license and was taking them to school and everything. I drew the line when she asked me to borrow her money to pay her electric bills, meaning she was behind. I stopped going over there and helping with the kids, and instead I called CPS, which is Child Protective Services, and told them everything. The children were to live at my parents' house while my sister goes to meetings and treatment. She also was placed on a no contact with multiple people in the county that were believed to be providing these drugs and was put on probation. My sister didn't get to see her kids for about 5 months, including holidays such as Thanksgiving and Christmas. Eventually, she did get clean again and got them back. But she is still pissed at me for reporting her. I truly don't believe I am wrong for this, especially after she lost custody of 2 other kids for her addiction previously. She is 39 now, sober, and has custody of 7/8 kids. She got custody of her firstborn child after this entire ordeal. He is now 18 and moved out. The 12-year-old is now 16 and is in therapy and anger management. Edit: I want you all to know that the kids were all eating good at the time, as they were children. They probably found any type of snack as well as having my sister's EBT food card. And as it isn't entirely healthy to let a child pick their own diet and food intake, they were not malnourished nor starving by any means. Let's start judging. You're not in the wrong, not even a sliver. Calling CPS engaged people who set standards which led your sister to be sober and able to be a present parent. Thank you for walking 5 miles and caring for these kids. They are fortunate to have you in their lives. You're not in the wrong. Never feel guilty for calling CPS, unless you are doing it in retaliation or to get a leg up in a divorce and custody battle. But if, like in your post stated, sister is all wall for days, that alone is a very good reason to call on her. What if you didn't live 5 miles away, but 50, 500, 5,000? You wouldn't know that David was in charge for God knows how long. What if she had an accident or overdosed? How long would David be able to hold everything together? How long was the food gonna last, the utilities paid for? Winter is arriving, it's cold, the heat goes out, now what? Should the kids freeze until Madam decides to come back home, risking frostbite, risking death? The food runs out, should they starve? Not to mention the negative side effects from one-sided nutrition. Was David able to whip up whole meals, or did he just made PB&Js, heated canned soups, and bought fast food? Again, do not feel guilty for protecting a child. Rule of thumb is that CPS wouldn't remove kids on a whim and impose a no-contact order on sister regarding not only L-Noun dealer but also her kids. There has to be something else that happened. You are not privy to know. She must have been onto someone's radar for this draconian step. CPS did here. She possibly was already under CPS investigation, and your call was the last straw for them. You're not in the wrong. You did the right thing. When you are older, if you can, hive your nephew a spare bedroom when he turns 18. Encourage him to go to college and help him escape being forced into the parent position. Next up, my 50-memon son 29 is getting ready to marry his fiancée of 3 years. I know her and I very much approve of their marriage. She's awesome, and I couldn't be prouder of my son. I told him that I'd help pay for his wedding and his mother, and I managed to put together $15,000, which should help them have a pretty decent wedding. My son announced his wedding, and eventually my daughter 27F found out from my son's fiancé. She called me pretty irate since money has always been a sore spot between us. Around 10 years ago, my son went off for college, and my daughter went shortly after. My son went to a local community college and later became a welder. My daughter was always more academically minded than him and got accepted to a pretty great school in New York for music. Problem is, my wife and I made too much money for her to get many grants or scholarships. I paid for my son's community college in full, but my daughter's college fund would basically only cover 1 year of tuition at the nice school, and I'd be out of pocket a little for room and board as well for that year. I told her that while I am so proud of her for getting into that school, I don't agree with her going to that school since we can't afford it. She didn't accept any alternative, such as going to a local school or going to a cheaper school in New York. She said that she was going irregardless, so I relented. I paid the deposit and she went. I paid the bills until her fund $50,000 was done. She then started taking out loans for school, even though I advised her against it. And she tried having me sign loans in my name to help pay for her education, which I did not, which didn't help our relationship. Our son got the rest of his payout in a bulk sum out of fairness. She graduated with about $150,000 in student loans. She worked for an orchestra for a while, but didn't make a lot, so she became a teacher in New York, but continued to struggle financially due to the burden of her loans. She frequently asked for money, which I stopped helping with 2 years ago. I once offered to have her move back home rent-free, but she doesn't want to move from New York to rural Florida. We cut her off financially. This has led to a frosty relationship with my daughter as she blames us for her woes, not taking loans for her and not helping more with her college costs. She even had a fiancé break things off when he found out her loan burden, which she blamed us for. It all culminated with her crying in tears, blaming us for her financial condition, calling us terrible parents, and that since we obviously care for our son more, he'll be the only one we have contact with. We tried to reassure her that we still love her so much and we'd make a similar contribution should she get married, but that didn't help her calm down. She hasn't returned our texts or calls in a while, and we're pretty beat up about it. My wife especially is crying pretty often. Did I mess up? Am I the idiot? I miss my baby girl. Let's start judging. You're not in the wrong. Unless she was insanely talented in music and had enough interest to get scholarships regardless of your pay scale, then she was stupid to go to such an expensive school and take out $150,000 in student loans. I say this as a former art student. The name of the school doesn't matter. What matters is your actual talent. Also, having lived in New York before, I can tell you she shouldn't be living there, is she can't afford it. And working as a teacher with $150,000 student loans, she definitely can't afford it. She needs to get over her entitlement. She put herself in this position. She cared more about the New York experience and going to a high-profile school. Now she has to pay for it. Your story isn't about who's the idiot. In my family, I'm the pragmatic oldest child who needs less help and gets none. So your daughter isn't the one I instinctively gravitate to. However, I can appreciate that it would be very hurtful to find out that you have ceased giving her financial assistance when she's struggling but splashed out $15,000 for a frivolous expense for your son. I can also fully appreciate the reasons you have for that decision. Internet points aren't going to make you miss your daughter less or change her mind. Ironically, the lesson you seem to want her to learn is that her choices have had consequences, and unfortunately, that's what you need to take from this situation. You had a selection of bad options, chose the one that was hopefully most in line with your values, and this is the consequence.